Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I was hired in 2013 by the ACLU of Michigan with a specific purpose. I was hired to investigate and write about Michigan's emergency manager law, which has nothing to do with natural disasters. Under Michigan law, the state can take over financially struggling cities, counties, and school districts by appointing someone that they call an emergency manager who takes complete control. And essentially, democracy is eliminated in these places that are taken over. Elected school boards, city councils, mayors only have whatever authority the emergency manager chooses to give them. They only get paid if the emergency manager chooses to pay them. And these emergency managers essentially have unfettered power. They can create new ordinances. They can eliminate existing ordinances. They can break collective bargaining agreements. They can sell off assets. Essentially, it's like a dictatorship, essentially, with no checks and balances whatsoever. They can do pretty much whatever they want. The law only says there's one thing that they cannot do, which is miss a bond payment. And that's essentially, I think, speaks to the heart and purpose of this law. It is the imposition of austerity on poor communities, and almost without exception, the school districts and cities taken over under this law have been majority African-American cities and school districts, and very poor cities and school districts. Flint has 57% of its population is African-American, and 40% of the people living there live below the poverty line. The city was devastated in a lot of ways. It's the birthplace of General Motors, but when General Motors began shutting factories there, they lost population, they lost tax base. The population dropped from a high of 200,000 people to 100,000 people. And then when new governor, Rick Snyder, took office, he cut revenue sharing. And this was after the financial collapse. So there was all the property taxes that were lost as a result of the collapse of the housing market. And then on top of that, they cut revenue sharing. So cities that were on the edge were pushed over, and then the state used that situation to justify coming in and taking over. Flint was taken over. There's a series of emergency managers. The law says that these emergency managers are supposed to only serve for 18 months. They're given all these extraordinary powers, and the thinking is, well, with all that power, they should be able to come in, clean up the situation, get out. Except that it didn't work that way, because the problem was not a managerial problem. The problem was a structural problem, but the law treats it like a managerial problem. So when it turned out that they could not right the situation within 18 months, they exploited a loophole in the law, and they would serve 17 months and 29 days and resign, and then a new one would be appointed, and the clock would start ticking all over again. So in 2014, in order to save a couple $1 million a year, the decision was made by one of these emergency managers to take Flint off of the Detroit regional system, which had been providing clean, safe water for 50 years, and switch to the Flint River, which people up in Flint call it GM sewer. And we talked to people that said when they heard the switch was being made, they thought it was a joke, because everybody knew how dirty the Flint River was. But it was not a joke. It was a tragic reality. And as soon as they began using the river, people started having problems. They can see that the water tasted bad and smelled bad and looked bad. It looked like the color of rust because it was rusty. Metal iron pipes were leaching rust particles into the water. And people started getting sick. Their hair began falling out in clumps. They started getting strange rashes, a lot of other physical ailments. were occurring. Then, because they did not really know how to treat the water, they rushed the plant into operation, even though we now know that it was not ready to be used. The people weren't trained properly. They just were not up to the task of treating the river water. So people were complaining, and then there was an E. coli outbreak. So there's a series of boil water notices. To deal with the E. coli, they upped the amount of chlorine, which then led to higher than acceptable levels of a carcinogenic byproduct of chlorine, a situation that existed for months and months and months without the city or state informing the public that that was occurring. The switchover occurred in April of 14. In early 15, I started going up there to investigate what was going on. One of the first meetings I went to was one of these emergency managers was in a town hall meeting, and people were asking him about the carcinogenic byproducts of chlorine called TTHMs. Someone in the audience shouted out, "Why didn't you tell us about the TTHMs?" And the emergency manager said, "As soon as we found out about it, we started to address the problem." "Yeah, but that's not telling us about it." "As soon as we found out about it, we started to address the problem." "Yeah, but that's not telling us about it." "Well, I'm telling you now." And it was just such a cold, callous attitude. You would never see an elected official who would treat his constituents that way, because they would not be an elected official very long if they treated their constituents that way. You just don't talk to people like that if you want to get their votes. But the emergency managers don't care about that. The only person that they answer to is the Treasury office and the governor that appointed them. And that was kind of a crystallizing moment for me. And filmmaker Kate Levy and I went up there and started interviewing people. And we went up there in April of 15 was the 1-year anniversary of the changeover. And there was a protest, and we interviewed a lot of people, and we kept going up there and interviewing people. And June of 15, we released a short documentary. It was only 6 or 7 minutes, but it really chronicled what was going on and tied it into the problem of emergency management. Right around the time that we released that video, an water expert for the US EPA wrote an internal memo about what was going on with the lead there. He had found out through one of the residents that the city and state were not treating the water with mandatory corrosion control chemicals, even though the river water was much more corrosive than the Detroit water that they had been using. And they found lead levels in one person's home of 13,200 parts per billion. So to put that in perspective, 0 parts per billion of lead are safe. The federal action level is 15 parts per billion. At 5,000 parts per billion lead, water is considered hazardous waste. So there's more than 2.5 times the level of hazardous waste water going into this family's home. This EPA employee named Miguel Del Toro, who's really the unsung hero in all this, wrote this memo. He was afraid that it was going to get watered down and buried in the bureaucracy, and so he gave it a copy to the homeowner that had these high lead levels, a woman by the name of Leanne Walters, who's another amazing person in this story. Because we had just done this video and took seriously the concerns being expressed by the people of Flint, she gave it to us. We published it. I wrote a story about it, and before I wrote the story, I tried to get comments from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. They just blew me off. We know now through emails that have come out that they said, "Oh, this reporter from the ACLU keeps calling." The word reporter in quotes. They didn't consider me a real reporter, so they didn't respond to me. But Michigan Public Radio, which did an excellent job in following up and then continuing to pursue the story, did get a comment from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. Their lead spokesman, a guy named Brad Werfel, who's since been resigned in disgrace, said, "We've been testing all over the city, and when it comes to lead in the water, the people of Flint can just," quote, "relax." At that point, I had on my hands a he said, she said story. You had Del Toro's memo, which was unvetted, and the MDEQ called him a rogue employee, said don't pay attention to what he's saying, essentially, and MDEQ saying, water's safe, just relax. How do you get to the truth? The solution was to come up and do our own testing of the water. And Mark Edwards, MacArthur Genius Grant recipient from Virginia Tech, who had uncovered the lead and water problem in DC, had already been involved. We started talking. He got an emergency grant from the National Science Foundation, sent 300 test kits to Flint, ACLU, Virginia Tech, but with residents. Residents were the key to this. Got those sample kits out and collected, unprecedented. There had never been anything like this done before. And started shipping the sample kits back to Edwards at Virginia Tech. As soon as they began to analyze it, they saw that lead levels were much, much higher than what the state and city were claiming. While they were doing that, I did a parallel investigation, started filing Freedom of Information Act requests, getting documents that showed the reason the city and state were able to claim that water was at safe levels is because they were cheating on their tests, and they were cheating in a lot of different ways. Exactly 1 year ago, on September 15th in 2015, I was standing on the lawn of the City Hall in Flint. We held a press conference. We had done the water test. I had done my investigation. And we said, don't believe what the city and state are telling you. This water is not safe to drink. The lead levels are about twice what the city and state are claiming, and it poses a tremendous, tremendous danger. The state kept trying to deny that there was a problem. But eventually, other things occurred that made it be beyond dispute that Flint's water was contaminated with lead, and the people were being poisoned by their own government, which was then lying and telling them it was safe. This is about storytelling, but I want to put it in pitch for investigations, because it was really, the heart of this was not the storytelling, but the investigations that uncovered the truth. But here's the story that, as many times as I tell it, it's hard not to choke up a little bit, because it's, in its own way, kind of so quietly heroic, which is that we had the water sample kits sent to the Saints of God Church in Flint. It's in the heart of a really impoverished neighborhood, abandoned, burned down, vacant houses all around. And we're in the basement of the church, and there was a community organizer that was one of a handful of people that were participating in the effort to get the water kits distributed and collected and sent back for analysis. There's all these big cardboard boxes all around her. Her name is Naira Sharif, who's just a beautiful person, really like bubbly, enthusiastic, optimistic personality. She's standing there. We had a camera going and said, Naira, what's going on here? And she said, we got these water sample kits from Virginia Tech, and we're going to get them out to the people. And we're going to find out the truth about what's in our water. And that's what we did. We found out the truth. Despite all the opposition, despite all the lies, despite all the attempts to cover up, despite all the power of the state, these citizens, working relentlessly, finding allies to help, got to the truth about what was in their water. And that truth changed things. It changed things in so many ways. Flint, the governor was finally forced to admit the truth and allowed Flint to get back on the Detroit system. The water's still not safe to drink because so much damage had been done. But beyond that, the issue of lead in water is on the radar all over America now. The Guardian just did an excellent investigative project where they found that cities at least 30 cities were also cheating on their lead tests. And so the problem has been exposed. They're testing in schools where they were never being tested before. And like Mark Edwards from Virginia Tech told me at one point, the biggest threat is not having lead in your water. The biggest threat is having lead in your water and not knowing about it. And as a result of what the people of Flint did with the help of others was expose that truth. And what we, for as tragic as this situation is, it should also be a very, very inspiring story. A group of people that didn't really have very much in common except their plight came together and worked together and were relentless and kept at it until the truth was exposed and changed things for the better as a result. So that's our story. Thank you very much.